Interesting. How does that work, though? I mean, and because historically we've always seen that media is a space where not a lot of sort of investment happens in terms of okay, you know what, you won't get good multiples. It's difficult to. I mean, sure, you might scale, but our ARPUs are obviously average revenue per user for the uninitiated. Are scaringly low. So how does that work for an investment perspective? Like, what do you how does that entire system work?
So this was also the time when the entire streaming industry was taking off, right? And a lot of creators and content producers had gotten this new, completely new domain of expressing themselves.
Right.
And so that's the time when Rainshine sort of started doing this, right? And the idea was, so they had investments in, we had investments in companies like Beardas, which was Veerdas's company, or Culture Machine, which, if you remember back from the old YouTube days, had brands like Being India and Blush.
Yeah.
And the idea was that and so it was not a VC-style investment,
right.
You take a minority stake.
Right.
But this was mostly majority investments or complete buyouts.
Okay.
Then you sort of operate the company to this was more like PE style investment,
Okay, sure.
The company comes in, operates the company,
right,
increases efficiency in operations,
sure,
and then tries to exit later.
Interesting.
And the idea was, so for example, Culture Machine was doing mostly YouTube stuff. The idea was, okay, can we increase the margins by making shows for streaming platforms?
Super.
And because we had a bunch of these investments, the idea was you'll have a centralized sales team,
okay,
which will take IPs from all these different portfolio companies,
right,
and try and go and sell in the market.
Absolutely.
That was the broad. And there were other very interesting investments. I don't know if you remember this not newsletter, but this publication called 52.in.
Of course, the 52, yes.
Correct.
Yes, yes.
That was one of our investments, right? So, and they started doing these really long
form, absolutely, yes,
and
yes,
really good pieces.
Yes,
amazing
100%.
Pieces, some of the best long form journalism that you would have seen in the last.
100% agreed. 100%.
So that was one of our investments. The idea there was that because the streaming thing had taken off, that perhaps streamers would be interested in buying or optioning the rights for the stories that these guys were doing.
Right.
And that did end up happening in some small way, but the entire thesis was this: a new form of media had opened up. How can you sort of leverage this and try to spin a business?
Absolutely. I remember the entire time when it was like, when, of course, AIB was also sort of a pioneer in the space in the mid 2010s, you can say, and it was fascinating how a lot of the brands now, of course, you have the content to commerce game. Some players played that game, right, and obviously didn't work out too well. You see Good Glam Group pretty much right now, they're not doing too well, but I loved how that was a foresight that okay, well, this is new media, this is here to stay. People are consuming this, and how about we sort of do investments here? Even folk media was also doing a bunch of interesting channels with Mashable, with a bunch of other investments that they made. So that was there. And what were you doing there, Palash? Like, what was your sort of main role there?
Again, my ulterior motive was to be on the creative side, to be involved in productions and everything. But I wasn't hired for that. Obviously, I was hired for investing and strategy, so that was my role. Right? So I worked with a bunch of these companies at their operations, but my thing was, okay, how can I sort of stealthily go over to the creative?
Sure.
That's what I ended up doing. That's where I sort of produced my first podcast and wrote it, directed it. It was a fiction podcast,
right?
Which Audible bought.
Super.
And that's where I sort of opened up my arms, my wings out, and started dabbling in the creative side, which I was anyway doing before, right? So my whole thing was that on weekends I would read, I would write, I would put stuff out. I also made short films on the side while I was working with Air and all. But it's very, the monthly salary is very seductive.
It is, right? That SMS. I think it's all about the SMS that you get, right?
Exactly. Right?
At the end of the month.
Beginning of the month. So I wasn't gutsy enough to sort of leave that behind. And Rainshine sort of allowed me to continue with that, but still dabble on the... Rainshine in many ways was my dream job.
Right.
Because I basically, when I was thinking of joining the creative industry after Hotstar, I was like, okay, what's my dream job?
Yeah.
My dream job was, okay, I want to be in the business of I want to be in the creative industry,
Yeah.
while still on the sort of
course,
salary I was on.
sure,
Right?
sure.
And I knew that job doesn't exist.
Sure.
But along came Rainshine. It happened, but at some point, you have to take the leap of faith. You have to take that risk, which is what I did 2 years back, and I cut the cord and I'm a full-time creator now.